Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for today's Classy podcast. On this episode, I'm excited to talk with Classy's CEO and founder, Scot Chisholm, also a longtime friend of mine. We're going to talk to him about founding Classy, his story as our fearless leader, and how Classy's been focused on growth since 2011 and what we're looking forward to in the future. Hey Scot.
Hey Tori.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. So as you know, Classy Podcast just serves to tell the stories of leaders, and this season specifically, we're focused on founders that have grown their business. So we thought it would be perfect to talk to you, given Classy's growth in the past few years and the way that you've built our company has been, outstanding to watch and be a part of. So for me, this is
the way we built our company.
Exactly. So I was going to say, for me, it's been an honor to be working with you, under you, as a team with you. I've actually been working here since 2011. So it's been 6 years that I've been with Classy's growth.
Our official transformation to a technology company.
Yep, exactly. Joined a few months after. So I feel like I've been a part of the growth, but excited to hear from your perspective as the leader, the person kind of running it. You've been so good, been transparent with our team, what we've been doing, your decisions, but this will be an opportunity to kind of share that with the rest of the world.
Ultra transparency. I like it.
Yeah. So I love going back in my interviews to the early days of leaders. So before you got to Classy, let's go all the way back to when you were working in a pizza parlor.
Not like to preschool or something?
No, we won't go that far back. Okay. Not the womb.
Okay.
We're going to start a pizza parlor. But I'm curious, taking yourself back to those early days, pre-Classy, pre-San Diego, what were some lessons that you took from your early job that you think are still applicable to Scot today?
Good question. Can I back up a little bit so people know I was at a pizza parlor in the first place?
Please.
Great.
Give some context.
Context is good. So after I graduated from University of Massachusetts out there in Massachusetts, I got out of there basically the next day to drive cross country with my brother and my dad. And we landed in Ocean Beach, California. I met two of my friends who had graduated about 6 months before me. And they said, hey, weather's great, surf's great, come out for 6 months. And so that's really how it started. And when I got out of the car, I was starving and I was looking for my first meal. And about a block away, there was this new pizza shop that had just opened up. And it was called Casanova's Pizza. And they had a sign outside that said Boston Pizza. And I was like, I just came from Boston. I've never heard of Boston pizza. I've heard of New York pizza. I've heard of Chicago pizza. I got to try this out. I went 3,000 miles and now I found Boston pizza for the first time. That's great. So I walked in the door and the owner was really great and the pizza was actually good. So I went home and I grabbed my resume and I came back and I handed it to him. I was like, hey, can I be your first employee? And he's like, you look a little overqualified for this position. I was like, this is perfect. We were there for 6 months and whatnot. So he gave me the job. And in all seriousness, it was actually a phenomenal job. It was my first, sort of entrance into or exposure to entrepreneurship because he literally just opened the shop that day. I happened to just land on his street. I learned how to make a pizza. I learned how to toss the dough in the air and all that great stuff. So I don't use those skills quite as much as I used to, although I'd like to bring that back at some point. But I learned how to sell for the first time, not just the customers in the store, but we used to take all the extra pizza and go house to house and knock on the door and give them samples. And then we would go to a bar called Lucy's and a few others in Ocean Beach and be last calls, fast food service essentially. And that worked really good. It actually built up a strong network of referrals and the business started doing really well. And then of course I got my other two friends to work there and whatnot. But I think working at sort of a smaller shop like that and working with someone that self-admittedly, didn't have a ton of business acumen and me coming in with an engineering degree, knowing nothing about pizza, it was the first time that I think I was really tested in what true collaboration looks like, cross-functional, coming from totally different, diverse backgrounds. Who would have ever imagined that the two of us would have just landed in that pizza shop that moment, and who would have known he would have hired me in the first place? And we did really well, and it was fun. So I think making our own rules, making it up as we go, testing things out, going knocking on doors, all that stuff is very applicable to today, and it actually how I transitioned from there into Booz Allen Hamilton, which I worked for about 3 years. And then eventually we started Classy as a passion project on the side, was the guy came in to get a slice of pizza. And I struck up a conversation, and he happened to ask me something that must have been borderline technical, and I answered it, I guess decently smartly, or smartly, is that a word? And he's like, hey, what was your major? What do you do? And he's like, I work at Booz Allen Hamilton. You want to come in for an interview? And that's how I got that job. So actually the pizza shop got me the job at Booz Allen. And then eventually Booz Allen got me the job at Classy, more or less, because the network of friends and coworkers that I worked with at Booz Allen were the ones who actually supported us in our early endeavors of raising money for different charities in San Diego.
Sounds all very serendipitous.
It was, I think. And it was about, it was serendipitous, but it was also, I think, meant to happen in those stages. I wouldn't have been ready for the next stage if I hadn't gone through the one before. I think that's very true in life in general. It's kind of silly to think that it started with a pizza shop, but awesome at the same time. So I love the story.
So then you found yourself at Booz Allen, and then you were eventually hosting the first Stay Classy pub crawl. Can you talk us through that journey?
Yes. So we eventually recruited more of our friends from Boston, Massachusetts to move out to San Diego. And at some point, we were all living in this apartment together, and we decided that instead of just going out on the weekends and doing the same old thing, we wanted to give back or do something a little bit more beneficial. Because my mom had a history of breast cancer, and she battled that for 5 years. She went through chemo and radiation twice, and it really had a profound effect on myself. And my roommate at the time, Pete Sternberg, unfortunately had lost his father. And everyone in the house really had just been affected by it, and in a way that maybe we didn't even know until we sort of talked about it randomly. We decided to go on the American Cancer Society's website and to try to figure out like an event that we could become a part of, or a way to volunteer, or a way to fundraise for them. And I love the ACS, but it wasn't exactly easy to navigate, and we didn't find anything that really connected to us as 24-year-olds. So we sat around brainstorming, and our genius idea was to basically host a pub crawl, a charity pub crawl. And the movie Anchorman happened to be on in our apartment at the time. And Will Ferrell's catchphrase in that movie is "You stay classy, San Diego." And so my buddy Pete turned to me and said, "Well, why don't we name it the Stay Classy Pub Crawl?" Never in a million years thinking it would actually turn into anything but a pub crawl. And so that's exactly what we did. We literally went old school. We put flyers up around town, no joke, on the bar windows. And we hit the internet, which was basically MySpace at the time, to promote the event. And 75 people showed up. We were pretty new to San Diego, and we didn't know probably 75% of those folks. We raised $1,000. And I went back to my Booz Allen apartment, and I called the woman at the ACS, and I said, hey, and God bless her, but I said, hey, guess what we did? We raised all this money. We raised $1,000 for this pub crawl down Garnett Street, and we plastered the businesses with posters and ACS and Stay Classy. And she's like, whoa, what did you do? You're not supposed to use the ACS logo for unsanctioned fundraising. And I was like, well, you guys don't want the $1,000 you raised? And she said, well, we want the $1,000, but you have to come to this sanctioned event in 2 weeks, and it's being held at Point Loma High School, and it's called the Relay for Life. And by the way, you've got to get a money order too. You can't bring the cash. So I reluctantly agreed, and 2 weeks later, we rallied our friends. We went there and learned that the Relay for Life is 1,000 mostly females walking around a track of varying ages, and we were 4 scrappy 24-year-olds with a money order in hand, and they actually walk around a truck for 24 hours. So we decided to do one lap, hand them the money order, and got out as fast as we could. And the moral of the story was, and the lesson that we learned was why does giving back, why does fundraising need to be so hard? Why is there so much friction in the process? Why did we have to do a pub crawl and have us call and go to the Relay for Life and all that stuff? And it was a great experience for us, because it inspired us to basically continue and do more fundraising throughout San Diego with a simple mission of bringing young people into the fold and making philanthropy and giving back fun and accessible and a lot more simple. And so that was really the initial mission of the company. It had nothing to do with technology. And it went on for essentially 4 years. And I like to call it intense market research. But we branched out besides the cancer cause, and started partnering with nonprofits in the San Diego community to pick a project. And then we would host an event and we would fundraise for that specific project. So we'd make the impact really tangible. We would market ourselves on Facebook, MySpace, and pretty much every other channel that would attract young people. And the events grew, like literally into the thousands, to the point where the biggest event we had was this music festival called the Elemental Experience down in Mission Bay, and they no longer let you have concerts there because of us. Sorry, everyone. But it was headlined by Modest Yahoo and Mason Jennings and Bass Nectar. And it was that event where we basically outgrew the jury rig system that we had been using to take ticketing for our events and to allow the attendees to make a donation. What we were missing before was the ability for the individual attendees to actually branch out into their own social networks and raise money and tap into their own friends and family. So we hired someone, a contractor, who then later became another co-founder of Classy, the technology company later. But he went on to build the alpha version of what would become Classy, the software, for our own Modest Yahoo event. And it simply let someone buy a ticket, create a personal fundraising page, and then in a few clicks share it on social media, which at the time was really just MySpace and Facebook. And it sounds so simple now when you think back. That was only 5-6 years ago, but that was really innovative at the time. And the nonprofits that were benefiting, I think we're benefiting 3 or so, they said, hey, what you guys have built is pretty amazing. Can we use this for our own campaigns and events throughout the year outside of your Modest Yahoo show? And that's really when the light bulb moment went on for us, and we said, "Wow, that's interesting. Like, what are they using for their, what are they using now, and how does this compare, and why do they think this is great?" And that led us down sort of a path to explore the market, to explore the opportunity, to understand what we had even built, and then to start to refine the idea. And we started to think about, wow, this could be more than an event series to rally young people in San Diego. Maybe this is something that could become not only just a technology for the dozen organizations we're working for, but something that could empower every nonprofit and allow them to not only connect with the younger donor base, but to make their lives a lot easier and fundraise a lot more.
Mm-hmm. So that was 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe Classy then to Classy now?
Oh man, a lot has changed in a good way. In the very early days when we were basically a passion project. Like I said, we did 4 years or so of intense market research, working in the trenches with the folks running these local nonprofits, and really started to understand their pain. And that really was the spark of everything. I think timing was great. We were lucky, and we were lucky to build an app that made sense for them at that moment in time. And so I think what we did right back then was just sort of follow our instincts and look at the opportunity in front of us. And at the time, it didn't look huge. It looked small, but we chased it. I think that's always what we've done, even to today. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen in 5 years' time and 10 years' time. But if you can see the opportunity in front of you and go after it, if you have the guts to go after it, I think that's what matters. So I think that's similar to how we look at things today. And that started really from those early days. And that became, a lot of that thinking became the company's ideology, core purpose, as we call it here, which is the mission, the values, and the vision. And that was all set in the early days. It may not have been written down on a wall. It may not have been, listed out and everyone knew exactly what there was, but everyone felt it. You knew what it was and why you were connected, because if a group of people are doing something together, regardless of who the leader really is, you're sharing the core purpose, whether you know it or not. And so eventually you do write that down. You do put it in. You do put it somewhere for everyone to see as new people come on. But it really starts with the original group and the original reason of why you got into this in the first place. And I think one of my biggest roles and really obligations is to allow that to continue forward, but also evolve in the right way. Because it's never going to be the exact same, and that's okay. You have to have those pillars that are there, the mission, the values, visions. It's something that you iterate on over time. But but you let the folks that join the organization iterate on it with you, so that ideally in 5-6 years, the core purpose is actually an improved core purpose that hasn't radically changed. You don't want it to be radically different, but you've iterated on it and you've made it better over time with different perspective and diversity and whatnot.
What are some examples of, as a founder, you letting others kind of feel empowered to take over that vision and values and improve them, in your words?
Yeah. I mean, every year, a really tangible example is every year we do, as you know, a company retreat. And it's an opportunity for us to sort of hit the pause button on the day-to-day hectic, sort of operations and goals and everything else, and to look at who we are, to check back in on that, and make sure that everyone sort of buys into it internally, makes it their own. And that's a really important process. In the beginning, everyone's there is that buy-in, because you're sort of like you're feeling the core purpose, and it's a lot through osmosis that you stay aligned. As you get bigger, when you get to 50 folks and then 100, and we're at 200. It doesn't happen by osmosis as easily, and that can break down. So it's really important to dedicate time to check back in on that. And even if someone has started, the day before at the company retreat, or they've been there for 5 or 6 years, it's equally as important to check back in on the core purpose, and to remind yourself why you came here in the first place, why you're still there. And then I think my job is to provide this space for folks to give their perspective of what the core values, for instance, mean to them. In some cases, we've even thrown them up on the wall and say, do they even make sense anymore? And building that level of trust, even if you're just started at Classy, and letting that person share their opinion of what it means to them. Because I think one of the coolest stories that I heard at the retreat this year was, and maybe it was Will, who's sitting right over there. He said to me, one of the coolest moments of being at the retreat was when I saw the slide deck, and there was that your symbol, the Classy symbol on the slide deck, and he'd been looking at it for so long, and he had made kind of assumptions on what Classy stood for to him as a human being, and he didn't even work here. And he saw the CL and he said, man, I made it, like I'm here. It's emotional. Serious.
Gives me goosebumps.
I know, seriously. And that's, I think, a powerful thing. And so when Will comes in and he can say something like that, and he knows that the brand stands for something that's more than us hitting our goals and everything else, then you've done it right.
Awesome. So this season is focused on growth, talking about growth. I'm curious to know, from a founder's perspective and the CEO, at what point did you recognize that Classy had potential for major growth? And I don't mean that you knew that the idea was going to work, that there was market opportunity, but along the journey from 2011 to now, when were you like, it kind of hit you like we're going to be able to grow?
Right. I think back on like the first time you're putting up a website is scary. So when you put up a website for the first time, you're like declaring to the world your intention, and you're like, hey, we're a fundraising platform, or we're whatever, and we're trying to do X. And why it's scary is because you don't know if anyone's going to actually come and sign up. And usually no one does for a little while. But when they start coming, I think the coolest thing was looking at like the signups hit our email. So every time a signup would come, like an email would be generated, and it'd be like, I think it said charity request or something, and it would have the details of the person. And at first, the first one was like, Bob's organization down the street in San Diego. Then it was like the 5 organizations we were raising money for from the fundraising events. But then it was like an organization in LA. Then it was an organization in Northern California, and then Massachusetts. And then it started like across the entire country. And that didn't take that long. I mean, it wasn't huge volume. But you had to think to yourself, how in the world is that person finding out about this? Like, we're not spending any money on advertising. We're doing basically no marketing, and somehow by word of mouth, this is spreading across the country, which signals some sort of demand. And I think that was definitely the first time. So, again, small numbers, but, and then to sort of, I think, in the early days, the other one, I remember this very well, was when we looked at the January 2011 donation report that said how much you had raised on the platform, and it was $8,000, which we thought that was awesome. We were like, $8,000, to give everyone else a sense of scale and progress over the last several years. The last day of 2016, across all the organizations on Classy, we raised $10 million in one day. And when I always think about that, and usually I'll just pick the best, the biggest donation day that we've had, and then just compare it to that 8,000, because it puts it in perspective. Yeah. And I just remember looking at that report and being like, wow, that's amazing. And then, I remember thinking the $100,000 raised on Classy during a month was amazing, and then and so on and so forth. And so finding some of those key moments and reflecting on them is really important, because then it gives you a sense of the progress, and it's a reminder. The other one I think that was a full circle story for me was when we had just built a very small sales team, and we had thought incorrectly so in the early days that the product would sell itself and that magically everyone would just continue to come off the internet and sign up. We were fooled by that early example, right? And we built a small sales team, and it turns out organizations love to talk to someone about what they're about to buy. Good bet to make. And eventually we started talking to bigger organizations, not just the small guys. And City of Hope specifically is a cancer hospital in LA. It was one of the first organizations of that size. They're like billions in revenue. And so we're all thinking at Classy, what are they doing talking to us? Like, that's incredible that they were even on their radar in the first place. And I think when they decided to make a bet on us for basically a nascent, if not a non-existent, peer-to-peer program in this massive, amazing, world-class cancer hospital and research facility, that to me was full circle because of the founding story. But also it signaled our ability to mature, that the product had gotten to a certain point that someone like that would feel that Classy was ready for them to make a bet on, and really, I think, set things in motion for us to work with really any sized organization over the following year or two. And then later on, they were, or we were lucky enough, or we were honored for my mom to actually receive that award from City of Hope for the work we've done in the cancer community and whatnot. And that was a really cool connecting things for me as well.
I remember that. What about setbacks along the way? Maybe if you could bring us through one major setback or two that you kind of remember from the founding time to now, and what you learned from them.
Yeah, no, we actually haven't had any setbacks. It's been up and to the right since day one. Really easy. Yeah, I recommend it. If you don't want to work hard and start a startup,
exactly.
No setbacks. Well, that's the TechCrunch version of events. When you read TechCrunch, it's up and to the right, smooth. Always. And the reality is, everyone's seen that chart. But our story was extremely up and down, as you know, but in a good way. I think it builds character, and it's important. And I think, one of the things that we weren't able to do early on, and we had to adapt, was raise outside financing. We were down here in San Diego. We were, we would consider ourselves a social enterprise, but we're working with nonprofit organizations, and it's not been looked at as sort of it's been looked at as more of a mission sort of driven opportunity, not necessarily a financial opportunity. And our position was that it could be both equally, and we could do even more good by using the social enterprise or for-profit hybrid model. And that was really tough. That was a tough pitch to even an angel investor, but certainly an institutional investor and a venture capitalist. Everyone's seen the show Silicon Valley. I think our story is probably pretty similar. More the episode where everyone says no, not the episode where everyone says yes. So we got, flatly denied at least 100 times, literally, from VCs around the entire country. And we were forced to raise money literally in increments of typically $10,000 at a time. And even with a staff of 5, that doesn't get you very far. Certainly if you're looking to scale, and software companies in general, unless you're, a very odd duck, you need capital to grow. It's really, really difficult to grow a software company without at least a few $1 million in some sort of initial capital. You don't always have to raise VC, but we knew we wanted to at least do a couple $1 million to get us really going. And we did that. So basically, we would raise it in $10,000 at a time or so, $25,000, and that limited our growth in certain areas. But we eventually were able to raise about $2 million-ish, $1.5 to $2 million, all from angel investors. The smallest investor we have is my now wife. She invested $7,500. She made a big bet.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Carrie. And then one of my best friends from high school invested $10,000. I've got a lot of friends and family in there, but it expanded from that. We actually built a really awesome network to the point where we had one of we call super angels, who were sort of like the lead angels who would put in the most funding. We had a gentleman called Bob Graham out of Texas, and he was involved with Invesco for a while, so a very successful businessman. And he had retired. He just started a foundation, and one of the charities that were funded by his foundation were using Classy in like its infancy. And he literally cold called us and said, "Hey, you guys taking angel investment?" It was about as great as it could get. So I'm getting to the setback. So when we raised this money, essentially we had gotten to a certain stage of growth, and we had used a lot of it to grow. And it was at that point we kind of knew we need to go for institutional money. And we heard a lot of no's again up in Silicon Valley, but there was one VC that said yes. They weren't in Silicon Valley. They won't be named here on the show, but it was a $5 million Series A term sheet at a really pretty decent valuation. And we were running out of money quickly. So the due diligence process was going on and on. It was like through the holiday season and Christmas, and all of a sudden we're getting more nervous, and the cash we had was dwindling to the point where we eventually had probably 30 to 60 days left of cash. And I wasn't out looking for the angel money because we were putting all of our eggs in this one basket. Mm-hmm. And myself and my co-founder Pat got on the phone with them right after Christmas, and they put us on the phone call with this other gentleman from Canada, actually. And we didn't even know what the call was about. We thought it was part of the due diligence. And we learned about 10 minutes into the call that they were interested in selling the Classy Awards. As you know, very familiar. They thought it was a distraction. They didn't understand the value, and they were wondering how much they could actually sell it for. And we got off the phone, and the Classy Awards is a big part of our soul. It's a big part of the core purpose. It's the social mission of the company. For those who don't know what the Classy Awards is, it's now the largest philanthropic award show in the country, almost like the Oscars of philanthropy. And so when we heard that, we were like, that's just that goes against what we stand for. And so we kind of talked it out, and we ripped up the term sheet and walked away from the $5 million with 60 days of runway left. And that was a really hard conversation with the rest of the folks who were like, "Hey, finally we'll get like a salary or something maybe, or whatever else." And they all knew we've always been super transparent about the business, so everyone knew that we were sort of in like a do or die moment. And just at that moment in time, basically, and we had more or less a transactional model, a pay-as-you-go model in the early days. So when a client succeeds, we get a little bit of a revenue from that, a little bit of a fee, essentially. And our client at the time, one of our biggest ones, Visible Children, launched their campaign, and it was called Coney 2012. And it eventually became, over the next 30 days, the most successful viral campaign ever. And we happened to be the donation capability for that campaign. Our servers almost blew up, but we were able to basically self-fund enough to extend the runway of the company another 60 days through that campaign in partnership with the Visible Children to then get a $500,000 angel check, which extended the runway more, and then we were eventually able to raise institutional investment. So again, another serendipitous story and moment. But the setback, we have a core value. It's adapt and overcome, and I think that was highly relevant in that moment.
I can relive that setback with you.
Yes, yeah.
I'm pretty sure Coney 2012 is why I have a job today. I was an unpaid intern when
pretty much why we
were going through
that.
Yes,
yes, exactly. Yes.
So I'm curious from your perspective, I've always wanted to ask you this, how you kind of reconcile being a successful tech startup in San Diego and also being a nationally recognized platform for nonprofits. Do they complement each other? Do they contrast with each other? How do those two sort of concepts work in your mind?
So being founded here in the city, that's a really good question. I think it's really easy to let your mind go to, hey, we could only be successful in Silicon Valley and where, the tech mecca of the world. And we've had those moments in time where we've thought about that. Ultimately, we decided to stay in San Diego and scale from here. And I think that was one of the best decisions we ever made. Some of my favorite companies like HubSpot or MailChimp or 37 Signals in Chicago, HubSpot in Boston, MailChimp in Atlanta, the city itself became a part of the company. I mean, our names stay classy. How could we ever move, right? But in all honesty, like we're, a little bit of a bigger fish in a larger pond. And we're able to not only take advantage of the resources that are available here, but also give back in that way and let the city become part of our identity from a cultural perspective. And I think it means we have to try a little harder to recruit folks to San Diego. In some cases, we have to try a little harder in other areas. But in all honesty, I think you can build an amazing brand and a company in any city. And I think that it's the pros have far outweighed the cons over the years. So it is a extremely non-regrettable decision that we had decided to stay here.
Awesome. So nonprofits and for-profits are often seen as kind of separate from each other in the sense just the way that they operate in traditional standards. I think we're seeing the two worlds blend now. I'm curious from your perspective, do you agree that they are so separate? And if you don't agree with that, why? How do they complement each other? How do we as Classy help change the narrative on that message?
Yeah, I think the two worlds are absolutely colliding. You could look at it sort of from two different directions. One, from the for-profit world, I think the best companies are already very purpose-driven. And I think nonprofits are naturally, they have to be purpose-driven, and that's how they sort of attract people to donate. And to get involved. But the best for-profit organizations have always been purpose-driven. Like I would even argue that Apple has been purpose-driven, Amazon, so on and so forth. And it's very clear to the consumer and everyone that's involved why they're doing what they're doing. So I think more for-profits could be more purpose-driven, but they're moving in that direction. One more tangible example is the rate of corporate foundations is increasing faster than any type of nonprofit. And it's because every for-profit realizes that they have to have a social mission. And the way that they're doing that is to build a foundation versus having a really small sort of CSR department that just works with someone to cut checks every month. It's more of a group that gets the employees involved in civic engagements, donations, fundraising, et cetera, hopefully all tied to what the company, the for-profit, believes in. And then I think the next sort of version of that, what you're seeing with B Corps and social enterprises, is the actual mission of the company. The for-profit or the for-profit mission is actually more centered in the middle between nonprofit and for-profit. And the goal of the organization is to do both, generate returns for investors and also generate social returns as well. And on the nonprofit side, I think, you certainly have like small or community-based organizations that really need donations to stay afloat and whatnot. But you're starting to see a trend towards a dual model of fundraising, using Classy, for instance, but also they call it fee for service. It's a technical word, but it's basically just, charging something for your product or service and almost operating more like a hybrid. And that's not that different than a B Corp. And so both sides are sort of intersecting in a really interesting way. A lot of it is around their business model, and a lot of it is around how at the board level, how the ideologies of the organizations are taking the best from both sides and trying to blend them together into something that I think is probably more representative of the future of business in general. The future of all organizations is probably coming towards the center somewhere. So yeah.
As someone that's making decisions at the board level for Classy, I'm curious how you keep injecting our social mission into decision making.
That's a really, really good question. And truthfully, it's hard. It's really hard. I think it's actually easier with the staff, and at the board level, it takes some reminder of that. And I think that's the role of the founders in a big way. So we have really we have a board that represents different shareholder classes, and then myself and Pat are on the board. And I think it's our job to remind the board and everyone else, but remind the board about, in certain instances and times, why we started the company in the first place, and to give them the perspective of the founding team and some of that core ideology, because they're not in the office every day. I don't expect them to be, have like use the word osmosis earlier. I don't expect them to have sucked all of that up. I mean, we live it every single day. We're talking to clients and customers on the phone. We're seeing amazing social missions. So we have to tell those stories, even at the board level. Hey, we hit this goal or whatnot, but here's what it actually meant, right? Like, Malala, for instance, when she launched her nonprofit On Classy, that could have easily just been a footnote somewhere. Well, we made sure that the board knew that and saw that. It's just one example, but every single meeting we have, we try to infuse some of the stories of our clients so that that connection is clear. And that moves well beyond the board too, because as you know, when you're smaller, you almost, regardless of what group you're in, marketing, sales, customer success, what have you, engineering, you see those stories. It's actually much easier to see them because you're just like all together. When you're 200 people, in certain instances, and depending on what department you're in, you're not on the front lines. Like the folks in accounting, for instance, they're not, maybe for collections, but they're not talking to an organization as much as our customer success team. So they're not seeing those stories. So it's imperative for myself and the rest of the leadership team, and really everyone else at Classy, to bring those stories to the surface and always drive the connection between the financial goals and the impact. And the impact is really the results of the fundraising. Where are the dollars going? What's the result of it? Like, what's the outcome? And that's the good stuff. I think that's what gets people out of bed in the morning.
You hear all these stories about large nonprofits that have lost their connection to their why, and they do workshops of reminders or presentations of, hey, here's who we serve. This is why we're doing what we're doing. Do you anticipate Classy getting to a point where we're going to need to remind ourselves of our why?
I hope we don't need a workshop to do it. I think we are already doing that. So I think that the retreats in other instances are us reminding ourselves of our why, but we're just doing it in shorter cycles, and it feels like it's just part of the norm. But if we didn't do that, then we would be 5 years from now, we would be in a workshop asking that same question. But instead, we're forcing ourselves to make it part of the agenda, even when it doesn't necessarily seem important at the time. So it's, again, so important to carve out time so you never get to the point where everyone's completely lost. The North Star has got to be strong, and I think that's my obligation and core responsibility to make sure that it continues to be strong. It doesn't work all the time. It kind of goes in and out. It gets brighter sometimes and dims it sometimes. But by getting people involved in that and continuously reminding them, hopefully we can avoid workshops in the future.
About 7 minutes left. 5 minutes.
That was quick.
I know, it goes fast. So I'm curious, this is a broad question, but I'm excited to ask you, in your opinion, what does being a good leader mean?
That is a really good question. I think any good leader is able to have conviction around a direction and inspire people to not only follow them in that direction, but to also make that direction their own. And I think it ties back to the core purpose. So instead of, our mission, our values, our vision are not Scott's. Maybe I was one of the first couple people. Maybe I wrote them. Maybe I was the first one to write them. It doesn't really matter. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the 200th person needs to make it their own, or else it doesn't work. So good leaders, I think, recognize that. And I think it's about, carrying the torch, but it's about making sure that people make that their own. And I think really great leaders get that. The core purpose, Simon Sinek and all these guys, and understanding the why, it's connected to that. It's a similar. I sort of look at it through the ideology though, and I think that is key to leadership and creating the space for people to be involved in that process. And I also like scrappiness a lot, and it's not what makes a great leader, but I think from a strategic perspective, always thinking like an underdog is something that I always remind myself of, and trying to disrupt yourself before you get disrupted. and making sure that the things that you do around the office and the folks that you bring to Classy or recruit to Classy, you're always spicing it up. You're trying to bring new personalities and make people think a little bit differently. Don't always pull it off successfully, but I think creating space for that is really important over time, and building a culture that allows for that is really important over time.
From a leadership perspective, what are you focused on in 2017?
In 2017, I have this big word, orchestrate, in my head. So for our senior leadership team, when we do the assessments and 360 reviews and all of that, rather than having a list of like 20 personal development items, I asked everyone to just write down one word. And it's like, hey, what's the 2017 version of Scott or Joe or Todd or whoever? And mine was orchestrate. And what that means, it's very easy to remember, so it's just burned in my head, right? But what it means is thinking of myself more as a conductor and handing the baton off for certain things that I maybe even love doing, but I need to transfer ownership of those tasks so that I can concentrate on sort of the bigger picture stuff and eventually get more external, get out there, get out of the building, meet with more clients, speak about what Classy believes in and whatnot. So for me, it's about being a better orchestrator. That's what I'm focused on, and always focused on becoming a better leader. I've never taken the role for granted. Just because I'm a founder doesn't mean I'll always be the CEO necessarily. I have to earn my stripes with every phase of growth. So there's a lot of personal development too. One of our core values is always be learning. So earning your stripes mean I have to learn sometimes faster than anyone, right? Like I have to bring the people around me that are better than me in certain areas, so that I can continue to grow into the best version of myself while they can concentrate on the things that they're, much better at than me.
Can growth mean different things for a company at different times? Does it always have to mean bigger, better revenue? Could it just mean that individuals are growing? How can growth have different definitions for a company?
Yeah, I think in Silicon Valley, especially, growth means typically like, hey, we're growing at 200% revenue. It's like top line above all else. And financially, strategically, I'm not sure that makes a ton of sense. Especially for us, we've always had sort of a concept of balanced growth. I mean, we certainly are growing fast from that perspective, but I think we've always tried to do it with other sort of financial dimensions and strategies in mind. And then I would also say that employee count is sort of a way to measure like the team size and growth in a different way. But I think culture has an axis of growth as well, and it ties back to the earlier conversation when we were talking about the culture evolving. I view culture as like a living organism, really. And the culture is the shepherds of the core purpose, essentially. And so if that's not growing in the right way, yet you're concentrating on these other growth metrics, then you're essentially screwing yourself in the future. Like it's bound for failure at some point. You can only go so long on just like the 200% a year when the cultural dimension of growth is not going in the right direction. And it's not necessarily growth in employee count. It's healthy growth, right? It's not losing the fibers that made the magic happen in the early days. You got to keep the fibers intact. So it's growth in that way, which is a different axis.
Love it. All right, let's wrap it up with my favorite question, and going to bring the core value back to you.
All right.
What do you stand for?
What do I stand for? Whoa. You didn't give me that as a prep question.
Everyone gets it. We ask all of our interviewees this.
What do I stand for? I would say that I stand for the underdog. I'm gonna say that for two reasons. One is I think I've always viewed Classy as the underdog, and I like to create situations where people can become the best version of themselves, not only individually but as a team. I love the journey. The journey is what makes us all better. So underdog isn't necessarily a competitive underdog, but in a way we're all underdogs to the best version of ourselves. So that would be my answer.
Love it. Great answer.